Hello again, this is Jared, and today we are going to be reading another article by Dr. Ray Peat. This article I'm using the Wayback Machine to access, but it's on his main website, raypeat.com, under the article section, and it is called The Progesterone Deceptions. I thought I had read this one before, but I saw someone ask a question on one of the Facebook groups. But anyway, I was looking through his articles on progesterone, saw this one, and realized I had not made an audio version of this. So that's what I'm doing today, and I hope this is helpful in your health journey. This is how it goes. In the 1930s, it was demonstrated that estrogen, even in small doses, produced abortions, and that when it is given early enough, even a very small dose will prevent implantation of the fertilized embryo. Progesterone was known by the early 1940s to protect against the many toxic effects of estrogen, including abortion. But it was also known as nature's contraceptive, since it can prevent pregnancy without harmful side effects by different mechanisms, including prevention of sperm entry into the uterus. That is, progesterone prevents the miscarriages which result from excess estrogen. But if used before intercourse, it prevents conception, and thus is a true contraceptive. While estrogen is an abortifacient, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, abortifacient, not a contraceptive. And I think even the pro-life movement and abolition movement would find that very beneficial. It's interesting how people use words to define things, and really you need to understand, what do they say? They say define your terms before you have any type of argument, right? Because people are using this term contraceptive thinking they know what that means, when in reality it's not really a contraceptive. Right? It's not preventing conception. And if you believe that life starts at conception, then you would want to actually use a conception, you would want to use a contraceptive, versus an abortifacient, obviously. Anyway, continuing. In the 1950s, there was a search for chemicals which would prevent ovulation. According to Carl Gerasi, drug companies were extremely reluctant to risk a religious backlash against their other products, and so hesitated to mark contraceptives. Obviously, the induction of monthly abortions would have been even harder to sell. According to Gerasi, and this is a quote, until the middle 1940s, it was assumed that progesterone's biological activity was extremely specific, and that almost any alteration of the molecule would diminish or abolish its activity. End quote. This would obviously discourage interest from the drug companies, who could patent a substance which they had chemically modified, but could not patent a simple natural substance. However, many substances, even non-steroidal chemicals, were known to have estrogenic action. By 1942, Hans Selye had demonstrated that natural steroids retain their activity when administered orally. But every drug company with a steroid patent had an obvious interest in having the public believe that there is a reason that the natural steroids cannot be conveniently used. The doctrine that natural steroids are destroyed by stomach acid appeared, was promoted, and was accepted without any supporting evidence. In the manufacture of progesterone, the precursor steroid is boiled in hydrochloric acid to free it from its glucose residue. No one seriously believed that stomach acid hurts progesterone, except the public and the doctors, who had seen the claim in their medical journals and had heard it from drug salesmen. That's amazing. Used as the precursor. Oh, no, used on the precursor. Boiled in hydrochloric acid. Goodness gracious. Okay, moving on. The myth stopped the use of the cheap tablets of progesterone as tablets of the synthetic, quote-unquote, progestins came on the market at a much higher price. Doctors who insisted on using real progesterone were forced to buy it in an injectable form. As a result, solubility became an issue. Progesterone is extremely insoluble in water, and though it is vastly more soluble in vegetable oil than in water, it does not stay in solution at room temperature, even at the low concentration of 1 part in 1,000 parts of typical vegetable oil. When people speak of an allergy to progesterone, or even to penicillin, they generally are not aware of the presence of a very toxic solvent. And I have a personal story on this. We did injectable progesterone early on for my wife. And wow, I'm talking a mass. It created a mass under her skin, and oh, it was extremely irritating. Physically irritating, not just mentally and emotionally. And so anyway, we had to switch to a suppository and eventually to the Progesti product. But this makes a lot of sense here. I've witnessed this firsthand. Okay, moving on with the article. For a time, progesterone was often sold dissolved in benzyl benzoate. The physician's desk reference warned of possible allergic reactions to progesterone. Now it is supposedly sold dissolved in vegetable oil with about 10% benzyl alcohol as supposedly a quote-unquote bacteriostatic agent. Again, bacteriostatic, with the prefix there being bacterial, I guess, bacterio, from the same root, right? Okay, moving on. Bacteriostatic water contains 0.9% to 1.9. All right, let me start over. Contains 0.9 to 1.9% benzyl alcohol and can irreversibly harm nerves. Its use in hospitals killed thousands of babies. Awareness of benzyl alcohol's toxicity goes back to 1918 at least. It was proposed as an effective insecticide and was found to be toxic to many animal systems. The safe systemic dose is exceeded with an injection of 150 milligrams of progesterone, yet the local concentration is far higher. It can cause a severe reaction even when used at a lower concentration in bacteriostatic water. Oh, man, that kills me. Because, that's, just like everything we've seen, I don't know how long back it goes, people using, essentially nerve agents, what we're calling here an insecticide, right? Why is it an insecticide? Typically because it attacks the nervous system of that insect. And again, not making any claims here, but, well, if it attacks the insect's nervous system, it would probably attack ours or, an unborn baby's nervous system. Okay, moving on. Other alcohols, including ethanol, have been used as solvents, but since ethanol even more than benzyl alcohol, have an affinity for water, the solution decomposes in contact with tissue water. In spite of the toxicity of the vehicle, several beneficial effects can be obtained with injected progesterone in serious conditions such as epilepsy or cancer of the breast or uterus. Many researchers have commented on the very obvious difficulty of giving very large amounts of progesterone. My comparisons of oral progesterone in tocopherol with other forms and methods of administration show a roughly similar efficiency for oral and inject progesterone, and about 1/20th the effect for suppositories. Crystals of progesterone are visible in the suppositories I have examined, and this material is obviously wasted. And I don't know enough about biochemistry to understand why that is obviously wasted. Outside of, I don't know, bound to itself? I'm not sure. Okay. An old theory of vitamin E's mechanism of action in improving fertility was that it spares progesterone. It is established that some of the effects of vitamin E and progesterone are similar. For example, both prevent oxygen waste and appear to improve mitochondrial coupling of phosphorylation with respiration. I suspected that if they actually both work at the same mitochondrial site, then they must have a high mutual solubility. Knowing the long-standing problem of administering large doses of progesterone without a toxic solvent, I applied for and was granted a patent for the composition of progesterone in tocopherol. One of my reasons for publishing in the form of patents is that I have had many years of experience in having my discoveries taken up by others without acknowledgement, if they are compatible with conventional prejudices. Probably said with a little sass there. Alright, moving on. Typically, an editor rejects a paper and then a few months later publishes a very similar paper by someone else. My dissertation research, which established that an estrogen excess kills the embryo by suffocation, and that progesterone protects the embryo by promoting the delivery of both oxygen and glucose, didn't strike a responsive chord in the journals, which are heavily influenced by funds from the drug industry. According to a consultant for a major medical journal, the idea, and here's a quote, of dissolving progesterone, a fat-soluble steroid hormone, in vitamin E, which is then incorporated into chylomicrons, absorbed via the lymphatics, and thus avoids the liver on the so-called first pass, is so simple it is amazing that the pharmaceutical companies have not jumped on it, end quote. And then in parentheses we have, a more sophisticated writer might have said, quote-unquote, stomped on it. More accurate. Okay, that was my comment, so sorry. In the powder form, direct and intimate contact with mucous membrane allows lipid phase to lipid phase transfer of progesterone molecules instead of bypassing the liver. Much of the progesterone is picked up in the portal circulation, where a major part of it is glucuronidated and made water soluble for prompt excretion. Since this glucuronide, man, I'm not pronouncing that correctly probably, but glucuronide, I think is how you say it. Goodness gracious. Since this glucuronide form cross-reacts to some extent with the ordinary progesterone in the assay process, and since 50% of the ordinary free progesterone is carried inside the red blood cells, and 50% is associated with proteins in the plasma, while the glucuronide hardly enters the red blood cells at all, it is better to judge by clinical efficacy when comparing different oral forms. My comparisons show several times higher potency in the tocopherol composition than in powder form. Since progesterone's use as a drug antedates the 1938 law requiring special federal approval, its legal status is similar to that of thyroid hormone. Unfortunately for both thyroid and progesterone, there is a tendency to cut corners for the sake of a bigger profit margin. For example, steroid acetates are generally a little cheaper than the simple natural steroid. Some people assume that an acetate or butyrate can be substituted for the steroid itself. This can cause dangerous reactions. Medroxyprogesterone acetate is considered a progestin, though it is not supportive of gestation, because it modifies the uterus in approximately the ways progesterone does. But it is luteolytic and lowers the ovary's production of progesterone, while progesterone itself has a positive effect on the corpus luteum, stimulating progesterone synthesis. Defining quote-unquote progestin in a narrow way allows many synthetics to be sold as progestogens, though some of them are strongly estrogenic, allowing them to function as contraceptives. It is odd that contraceptives and agents which suppress progesterone synthesis should be officially called supported of pregnancy. It is probably partly the acetate group in the medroxyprogesterone acetate molecule which makes it bind firmly to receptors, yet causes it to block the enzymes which would normally be involved in progesterone metabolism. I think testosterone even might be a safer progestin than medroxyprogesterone acetate. Pregnenolone acetate similarly blocks the enzymes which normally metabolize pregnenolone. In aspirin, it has been found that it is the acetyl group which, by a free radical action, blocks an enzyme involved in prostaglandin synthesis. If the category called quote-unquote progestogens or progestins is to be defined on the basis of a single tissue reaction, then it is possible to classify progesterone with the toxic synthetic substances. But then it becomes highly deceptive to imply that progesterone is just a progestin, or that it has any of the other properties of the toxic synthetics. But this continues to be done. The warnings about, and this is in quotes, progestins causing birth defects, for example, cause epileptic women to use conventional anti-seizure drugs, all of which cause birth defects during pregnancy, and to avoid natural progesterone, which generally could control their seizures. Thus, a false message attached to progesterone creates precisely the harm it claims to want to prevent. In my communications with the regulatory agencies, I have concluded that their attempts to deceive are too blatant to ascribe to incompetence. Whether it's the Forest Service, the FDA, the principle is the same. The regulatory agencies have been captured by the regulated industries. Ooh, that one hits home. All right. Another place to cut costs is in the tocopherol. Tocopherol acetate does have vitamin E activity, but since it is only about half as efficiently absorbed as the simple tocopherol, it is a mistake to save a few dollars an ounce at the expense of losing half of the therapeutic effect. People who have compared natural progesterone in natural tocopherols with other compositions have insisted that the other compositions must not contain progesterone. The taste of natural vitamin E is stronger than that of the synthetic forms, but since the mixture is absorbed by any tissue it contacts, including various parts of the bowel, it can be taken in a capsule. If a small amount of olive oil is used with it, absorption through the skin is very rapid. Many women use it vaginally, spread it onto a diaphragm to hold it in contact with the membranes. The efficiency of absorption by all routes is so high that patients should be warned against its anesthetic effect until their dosage requirement is known approximately. Some physicians prefer concentrations higher than 10%, but the risk of accidental drunkenness or anesthesia is higher with the stronger solutions. It is an indication of the tocopherol solution's high availability that medical researchers such as Roy Hertz, who thought they were administering maximal doses by combining injections with suppositories, never mentioned the problem of an anesthetic effect from an overdose. Similarly, it is evidence of the extremely poor availability of the micropulverized progesterone that the researchers have administered hundreds of milligrams per day without mentioning the symptoms of an overdose. Because of the difficulties involved in scientifically studying the clinical effectiveness of various formulations, I think the most practical way of evaluating the effectiveness of different progesterone formulations is to measure the amount extractable from the red blood cells a few hours after the peak serum level has been reached. This will reasonably reflect the amounts reaching brain cells, adrenal glands, and the various other cells on which progesterone has its therapeutic action. And as usual, the references are here at the bottom. I'm not here making recommendations or anything like that. This is all for research purposes. I hope this is helpful for you all. I very much enjoyed this article. A lot of good stuff in here, and this is why we use over here the Progesti Kenogen product. So I'll leave something about that in the description of this video. And again, I very much appreciate you guys. I hope that you like the video, subscribe to the channel so you get notified next time I put a video out, and share this because, man, this topic is so much on my heart, and I love coming back to progesterone because, man, we had so much trouble having our babies. We had 2 miscarriages, And then our first baby that was born, she was a twin, and we lost her twin. And, oh man, and I'm tearing up here, because I think I'm going to keep recording, because this is important. We got to let people know about this. This is important. You know, people are losing babies. And there's nothing more important than protecting babies and children. So I hope you guys share this and